Hi everyone and welcome to week whatever this is in isolation. Um, Sadly, it does not look obviously like we're going to meet face to face again this semester, but we have this week's instructional video and then there'll be one more next week. The following week is typically a review of the material that'll be on the final test, and there's really no way to do that without having interaction. So for that week, not next Monday, but the following Monday, I'm not sure of the date. Let me pull that up and we'll take a look. If I have my dates correct, anyway. Yes, so today is Sunday the 5th, so this video is for the 6th. Then we have next week, the 13th, another video like this. Then we'll have on the 20th our review of material because if I'm not mistaken, this is finals week, the 26th through May 1st. So if that's the case, if I'm correct, and I'll double check on all of that, then on this date, the 20th, we'll meet virtually at our normal time at 3:30 p.m. via Zoom. Again, there's no way that we can really accurately go over all of that material without having some interaction back and forth. So we'll have this week, we'll have next week like this, and then we will have a Zoom meeting on the 20th. And we'll send out information prior to that on all of that. So anyway, for today, because of the fact that we are getting down to the wire here, we're getting a little more limited in the time we have. We're going to actually cover two topics today. Neither one of them are overly complicated, so I feel that we can get these in today. So what we're going to look at first, and I just want to remind you of something because it's sort of the first two are sort of a carryover from what we did in class once before. Let's get the right program here. There we go. We had talked about histograms, and they're going to be sort of an integral part of the first part of today's lesson. So I want to make sure that you understand when you're in Photoshop where to find that histogram. And here you'll see it in a palette. If you do not see the histogram when you're in Photoshop, go under the window menu and make sure that it's checked. If it is checked, it's on your window somewhere. It's just hidden. If it's not, then check that and the window will show up. If you're not able to access Photoshop, it's going to be a little more difficult, but not insurmountable. Again, there is a download, a trial version download, which used to be 30 days. Now, unfortunately, it's only 7 days. However, and I'll go in and show you where that is. It's on adobe.com if you're not familiar. It's pretty simple, pretty easy to find. All right, if you go to Adobe and their main site, this is adobe.com, you can actually, there's a couple of places you can access it, but if you come all the way down to products and click on Creative Cloud, you can click the button that says start your free trial. But actually, if you want to be more specific, because that encompasses a lot of programs, if you don't want to download InDesign and Premiere and Illustrator and all of that, just go to Photoshop. This will give you Photoshop and Lightroom. Click the try it for free button. It'll bring up, you just basically click this first one for Lightroom and Photoshop, start free trial, and it's 7 days free. I believe it is an automatic billing though, so you do have to cancel it before that 7 days. But if you work it out correctly, you can probably get this week's assignment and next week's assignment in on that 7-day trial before it expires. So even if you don't own Photoshop, you should be able to limp through the rest of the semester doing this. So anyway, in Photoshop, under the histogram window, the colors version, which is the default, does not show me what I want to see, so I go to RGB. And then when you see the little warning sign, as we mentioned before, that means that the histogram is not accurate until you click this little icon, and then it redraws the histogram. So this is relatively even. I mean, the tones are distributed relatively even throughout, although they are a little more centered towards the low keys or the darker side. So again, if you're looking at the histogram, this area here represents 0 or black without detail. This area is white. The very end of it is white without detail. So the value is 255 here, 0 here, and middle gray, which is about 128, is right in the middle here. So what this histogram is showing us is that the bulk of the pixels in this image are darker than middle gray. So you've got all of this area in here, the backs of this hotel, the shadow areas, even the streets are probably a little darker than middle gray. So all of that comes into play as well. This is an area that's probably a lot more deserted right now than it was when I took this shot. So anyway, that's where the histogram resides. You'll kind of need that to keep tabs on what it is that we're going to do this week. So we're going to talk about high key and low key. We'll talk a little bit about mid key as well, but primarily we're going to talk about the high key and low key images and what that means. So in a high key image, and I'm going to pull these up for you one at a time and show them to you. Each one has got the histogram for this image embedded in the photo somewhere. So what you can see, again, knowing that this is middle gray right here, we know that the bulk of the tones in this image are lighter or brighter than 128. And notice that they don't go all the way to the edge. I'm going to make a little change on something here that hopefully will make it easier. I can spotlight some of this a little bit. I believe it's in accessibility. Let's see. Zoom, that's what I want. Keyboard shortcut, yeah, that's what we want. Okay, so I'll be able to, whoops, didn't quite do what I wanted. Let's try that again. Smooth images. All right, that should do it. Let me try that now. Wow, that's a lot of zoom. Not as, we don't want that much. Maximum, let's just knock that down a few pegs. There we go. That'll work. That should, I could probably go just a little lower even. Okay. So anyway, you can see that on this histogram, it doesn't go all the way to 255, so there's nothing in this image that is white without detail. It may look like there is if you look at some of these areas here and in the dress here and in the upper left hand corner. It probably looks as if they are. The fact is that they're not. We shouldn't be seeing this in editing mode. So let me open this image and we'll prove that to you. So if we look at the info palette and the area that has the RGB numbers, these are the red, green, and blue values. As I move my cursor through the image, you'll see numbers that'll show up there. Right now we're in the 220 range. Let's find right here on the hot edge of this dress. We're about the highest number I'm seeing is about 245. The brightest thing is actually right here. This histogram graphic is 255, but we're not worried about that. These areas up here are in the mid 240s. So nothing is really as bright as 255, and that's reflected on the histogram. So you can tell that. If you want to be sure about that, or if you want to find out what the brightest areas in the image are, all we need to do is add a levels adjustment layer. And so normally you would pull these sliders to make the highlights brighter. You would pull this to make the shadows darker. You would do this one to mess with the midtones. But there's a little trick here. If you hold down on the Mac, if you hold down the Option key, or on Windows if you hold down Alt, before you move one of these either highlight or shadow sliders, what it does is it'll show you where the brightest parts of the image are. As I drag it down, we can see that the little girl's dress in the upper right, what's showing orange here, is actually the brightest part, so right up in here. And if I do that with the shadow slider, it's showing me what the darkest parts of the image are, which are essentially right here in the deep pockets of this girl's hair. So, let me throw that away. So I know this being the brightest spot, if I put my cursor up in here, I'm seeing reds up around 247 is about the highest. Nothing really higher than that. So I know that I've got a good exposure here. We haven't lost any of the detail. So let me close this up and we'll look at some of the other images. So this one again, histogram is definitely showing everything to the right hand side, which is primarily the pillars here. You're seeing a little bit of a spike right here at 0. That is more than likely right in these areas, these little pockets on either side of her neck, the darkest parts of her hair, maybe even up here. We could verify that by opening it in Photoshop, but I'm pretty sure that's what we're looking at for the darkest areas, those little spikes, and that's not critical. Another one here where the spike is towed in a little bit, probably around the highest part here, about 235 or so. That's our background. And maybe even a good portion of his shirt. And we have a little bit of darker tones, but not very many in relationship to the bright tones. But again, it's not overexposed. The little underexposure, these are being right at black. You're going to have areas like that in an image. So there is some thought that a high key image should not contain any black. I disagree entirely. I think that when we're talking about high key, the definition of that is an image that is predominantly brighter than middle gray. In other words, most of the pixels in the image are predominantly light and not dark. It doesn't mean you can't have dark pixels in the image. So here again we see this spike at the 0 point, which I'm going to guess is this dark area right here in his shirt or in his sweater. Let's take a look and find out. So add a levels adjustment layer, hold down the option key and drag that slider, and yes, there it is. It's right there. There's a couple of spots. I mean, these areas are not as dark as that, obviously. That little spot right there is the darkest area in the image. But primarily, most of the pixels are to the right of middle gray. And again, that's mostly our background, the collar, some of the skin tones, and so forth. So this one is a little more even across. The spike that you see here at 255 is the border. It's the outer border around here. There are also a couple of areas in the image. These little highlights on the street here. Possibly this on the hat, this little part of the sign, but I doubt that that's even bright enough. I think it's probably these right through here, maybe back in here a little bit. The spike that you see in black is probably this area right here, and a little, I think even the hat part is probably brighter than that. So I see a little area in the doorway, and this over here, there's some spots there. But even though this is more of an even histogram, if you put a line right down the middle, again, most of the images, or most of the pixels rather, are to the right of middle gray. So that qualifies as a high key image. As does this one. Again, the spike in the white is here. The spike in the black, well, there's a little area right underneath her leg here. I see these black spots over here. That's probably what we're reading as far as the black spots. But again, draw a line right down the center. Whoops, most of the pixels in this image are to the right of that. So that's what makes this, for me, a high key image. You could say this is a little more mid key, and that you wouldn't be wrong in saying that, because most of the pixels are in this range right through here. But again, you could also make a statement for it being high key. This one's a little more obvious. Definitely the bulk, the vast majority of pixels are to the right. This is one of my underwater images. And again, nothing is overexposed really. This is coming down, it's towing down right at the edge here. Probably the brightest spot in the image is right about here. Not a lot of pixels there, not a lot right here that qualify for overexposed. So The image itself is exposed properly. Another underwater image. This one does not have anything that stretches all the way down to black. In fact, it doesn't have anything that's probably lower than about 50 or 60. And that's fine. You don't have to have the full range of a histogram in order to have a properly exposed image. It just all depends on what's in the image. For example, if you shot a white cat in a snowstorm, there's clearly not going to be a lot of pixels, if any, down in this area. You're primarily going to be up in here. Consequently, a black cat in a coal bin is going to be the opposite. You're going to have a lot down here, not a lot, if anything, up here, and that's still a perfectly exposed image. Again, here, so snow typically is going to burn out on you. In some cases, there's still a lot of detail in here, but a lot of this snow, and again, most of what you're seeing here is the border around the image. But as I pull my cursor through, I am seeing some 250s in the red channel. Nothing all the way up. Well, there's a 255 spot right there. I'm going to take a little bit of a different... I'm going to change my cursor here. And I'm looking for a specific one. And since I do this typically by utilizing keyboard shortcuts, I'm never really quite sure where what I'm looking for is. Definitely not there. There we go. I just want the eyedropper. All right, so again, this was 255 here. Most of this area does not reach that height, nor does much in the background. This is actually in the 230s back here. This area up here is going to be very close, 249, that whole area, so it's up pretty close to bright without detail. That's what all of this is. Of course, the blacks are the boots, the belt, some of these areas in the background, and so forth. Same thing here. You can definitely see detail throughout in that snow. There's going to be some white areas, but if you look at the histogram, nothing that's right up against that right-hand side. The darks on the left is definitely this area in the boots down here. So this is an interesting one because it's a high contrast black and white. It still, to me, qualifies as a high key image because the majority of pixels are to the right. But there are some dark blacks in here, and there are some areas in the skin tones that are up in this range, and that's fine. These areas can be almost white without detail and still be a well exposed image for this technique, which is high contrast. The idea here is to flatten out skin tones and eliminate the need for retouching, and that's why this technique is used. But to me, that still signifies a high key image. So let's look at the opposite now. Let's look at some low key images. Again with the histograms. Again, nothing here that goes all the way to 255. The brightest areas, you can see probably don't approach anything near that, but we do have some areas all the way to black, and those are going to be in the corners. Same thing here. There are a lot of black areas. I don't worry about it if they're in areas. This through here is not necessarily an area that I care about having detail, so that doesn't bother me. Also, the fact that I don't have any whites, there's really nothing in this image that should be bright white. So I'm going to take that as a good histogram as well. This is a tough shoot, by the way. Typically for this to work, and I'm not sure if I did it on this image, the stage lights in this theater are so much brighter than anything else that typically I need to do multiple exposures here. I need to expose one image for the stage, one image for the audience, and then combine the two in Photoshop. I don't remember if I did that, but I will. We will take a look at this, and you'll see that when we put our cursor right down in this brightest spot, we're only at about 180. So is there a brighter spot? Well, if you go up in this ceiling area, you'll see The blue channel is up in the 250s in some of these, and in this area the red channel gets up almost that high, but the other two channels don't, and that's why there's still detail here. Again, a lot of black down in here. That's in this lower right hand corner for the most part, and some other areas throughout. Just not going to have detail there, but it's still a well exposed image. Same thing here, even though there are some bright spots and some highlights on her, on the edge of her, nothing approaches bright white. The dark areas, again, we've got a black border around, and there are a number of black areas through here that should not have detail. It's not necessary. This one, wow, this really looks weird. Let's open it up to make it look a little better. There we go. So this, again, we've got the black border. The brightest areas in this image are probably these little highlights on the tips of the wings. Let me open this. I mean, other than the histogram, obviously, that's going to be 255. But if I go up in here, I'm only in the 180s. That's about... It's about the brightest thing. There's a 206, 207. If I move around and find just the right spot. But for the most part, this is, you know, there's a lot of middle gray, but a lot of darkness here as well. So that's definitely low key. So this one could surprise you because you look at this, obviously, and you think, wow, that's really bright. But again, remember that you don't having a low-key image doesn't mean you don't have bright spots in it. It just means overall the image has a little more of a dark feel, and the histogram bears that out. In fact, if you look, if we put the cursor in these bright areas, you'll see that they're only in the 240s. That's the brightest. Mid 240s are about the brightest thing that you can see here. So definitely not overexposed. Same thing with this image of the deer. The blacks are obviously the border and these areas back in here that were intentionally taken dark to let the tree stand out a little bit more. And even though he's lit very brightly from overhead, none of this is burnt out. None of it even approaches 255. The blackness is the border, the corners, and all of the areas in the image that don't really require detail. And again, easily viewable and seen as a low-key image, as is this. Nothing coming up at all into the bright range, not much past middle gray at all. The brightest areas are going to be your skin tones and the highlights on the left side here. There's just not a lot of those in that image. Very low-key. And even this one, which again the magnification is making that a little odd. There we go. Most of these pixels are middle of the range down into darkness. So that's what low key looks like. There is a mid key that you can talk about, and essentially all we're talking about when we talk about mid key is that the tones are distributed a little more evenly throughout the image. They might be concentrated in the middle, or they might just simply be spread out. Now the cool thing about an image like this and the other one, let's open the other one as well. This one's really even mostly across the board. The spike here is the shadow, or is the border. The spike here is probably these areas in the foreground, on the ground. Everything else is exposed properly. But these two images have the advantage of when you have a histogram that looks like this. This is one, these images are ones that your camera's meter will record very faithfully. It'll give you a very good exposure because this is what the meter expects to see. It expects a scene in front of it that is either centered in the air in the middle or spread out throughout. So you should get very good exposure using an in-camera meter for one of these, for either of these images rather. So that's mid key. So we've done high key, we've done low key, we've taken a look at mid key. And so that's really all that there is to know, or all that you need to know about those two techniques. Again, if we look at the images in mass, you can see even at a glance, even though there are some dark tones in some of these images, the histogram still always says that yes, they are high key, and these all say that they are low key. So I'll explain a little more about the assignment when we get to the end of the video, but Obviously, we're going to be creating high key and low key images, and that's why I wanted you to see a number of examples here so that you know exactly what we're talking about. And again, look at mostly the outdoor images because I know you're not working in a studio. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 images here that were shot outside and still qualify as high key. Not too hard to find them if you just know where to look. So that's part 1 of our series today. Part 2 is we're going to talk about juxtaposition, which is a compositional element. It's one of the ones we have not looked at yet. And basically, what it means is, actually, let's look. I had this pulled up the other day. Let me see if I can find it again. The actual definition of juxtaposition. There we go. It's listed as the act or an instance of placing two or more things side by side, often to compare or contrast or to create an interesting effect. So let's look at some examples. These are not my images. These are ones that I just went out and found. They're pretty interesting. So let me zoom in on this one to make it a little bit. So these are two billboards that whoever put them together had a bit of a sense of humor. The top one says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And underneath that, Bud Light. So that kind of says it all there. Just again, not only it was an interesting idea that somebody had, but somebody saw that, recognized it for what it was, and photographed it. So a lot of these photographs, a lot of these pictures are not great images. I wish I would have seen them photographed a little more creatively, but you'll get the idea at least. So this one's pretty cool too. The name of the street is Dream Way, and it's a dead end. So the two things definitely contrast each other, and you'll also find that in most instances of juxtaposition, there is an element of humor present, as there is here and in the first one as well. This one's not so much humorous as it is just the contrast. The sign says go slow, but the extended shutter speed makes it look like traffic is just speeding by. So that's an interesting take on that. This one does not have the humor, but we have this cruise ship or ferry on the right-hand side, which normally would be viewed as a huge boat. But with the ice flow in the background, it definitely looks smaller. So it's contrasting size basically in this one. This one I love. This woman's probably totally oblivious to the fact that this photo was taken and that somebody's playing the smiley face that's on the window against the sour look that's on her face. And the fact that they took this to black and white, I think, makes it even more interesting. This is a cool idea. This is a mushroom cloud from an atomic bomb, and someone has taken a photograph of some shrubbery and placed it on top because it looks like that could be the top of the mushroom cloud. So that's, again, just placing two or more things near each other that create an interesting effect. Sometimes juxtaposition can be old played against new. So you've got these old Chinese pagodas in the foreground contrasted with the new buildings that are going up in the background. Same thing here. New energy sources on the left, old energy sources on the right. This is probably my favorite. This is a great sense of scale, and the photographer waited for just the right moment for somebody to walk into that spot to make it look like they're being painted by the artist behind them. Great use of that technique. Probably the best one in this group. And then we have what looks like a homeless man on the left, just sort of lethargic. And then you've got this sculpture on the right of a very energetic person taking off. So again, those are some really good examples of juxtaposition. So your assignment for next week is actually 2 parts. There will be 3 images that I'm going to ask you to create. One would be any type of a low-key image, and please, if you do have access to Photoshop, I would like to make sure you check the histogram to make sure that it is low key or high key, because I'll be looking at that as well. So one low key image, one high key image, and one image that illustrates this theme of juxtaposition. Those are the three things that I want you to work on for next week. That assignment will be due on April 13th, just double checking the date. So I'm going to post this tomorrow on the 6th, and the assignment is due on the 13th. We'll only have one other assignment after this that'll be due on the 20th, and then that'll be our review date as well. I know this has been kind of difficult for everyone. I think it's probably even more difficult to motivate yourself to get things done when you're not physically on campus. But struggle through this, guys. Don't miss the assignments. They are so important now, way more important that we're not meeting face to face. And then please make sure your schedules are clear for that 3:30 time slot on Monday the 20th, and that'll be for our review of material. Have any questions? Contact me, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.